My guest today is Dr. Caroline Leaf, who is a world-renowned cognitive neuroscientist, mental health expert, and best-selling author. In today's episode, she talks with me about her latest bestseller, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, that teaches you how to create and maintain healthier thoughts and live with sustainable happiness. She teaches you how to achieve this through practical tools and techniques by engaging in a 5-action-oriented process called the Neurocycle. Welcome to my show, Dr. Leaf.
Thank you so much, James. It's great to be with you.
I've been looking forward to this all week. It's so funny. One of my two amazing sisters, Tanya, she introduced me to you years ago, and she's like, when I told her, she's like, "Oh my gosh, you have to! I can't wait to hear more about this." So a little shout out to my sister as well.
But
of course,
that's so lovely. Well, it's really lovely you do a great job. I love your show. So it's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Oh, that's so kind of you. How did you even get into this field of being a neuroscientist?
Well, I was always fascinated with the mind and the brain. And when I started, I actually got into do neurosurgery. And then I decided, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to be dealing with, people that are asleep. And I like people that are alive. I wanted to understand mind. Not alive, but awake. And I just felt that I wanted to understand the concept of mind and brain and see if there's a way that we could actually empower ourselves to understand this process. Because it's almost like a big philosophical thing is we're human and it's hard to be alive. So how can we manage this process? So mind management, even though I didn't have that terminology back when I was a teenager, that concept was very much dominant in my thinking. So I started doing a combination of different degrees, and I was very fortunate to get into a degree that was an experimental degree where they blended medicine, psychology, neuropsychology, neurology, communication pathology. It was a 7-year degree that they actually pushed into 4 years, and they kept us literally going 7 days a week, and we did clinical work, and it was the most immersion. It was a total immersion in the world of mind, brain, psychoneurobiology, and they don't actually have that degree anymore, and it's such a pity because it really transformed my life, and it really got me going further into doing my Masters and my Ph.D, and I still research, and I honestly attribute it to my foundation where I got so caught up in this whole process of trying to understand, what does it mean to be alive and to be a human, and what is the mind, what is the brain, what is a thought, what are memories? These are words we all throw around: mind, brain, thoughts, memories, emotions, happy, sad, mental health, but what are they and what level of agency do we have as humans? And I remember sitting in one of my neuroscience lectures in the 80s, and back in the 80s, they didn't believe that the brain could change. The mind and brain were seen as separate. They were seen as separate. So you had a mind and you had a brain, and they worked together. Now, currently, the mind and the brain have been subsumed into one. So that's kind of a backward move. We have that. That's a problem today, and we can talk about that. But essentially, in the 80s, they didn't believe the brain could change. And I remember sitting in a lecture and hearing this and challenging my professor and saying, that's impossible because we are changing as humans. We're never the same. We're constantly experiencing new stuff. So obviously the organ which the mind uses, which is the brain, the mind uses the brain, then the brain must change if the mind changes. So they said that was a ridiculous question. And I said, okay, well, I am now challenged. And I started doing clinical research. And I said, give me the worst situation, give me the most difficult thing to research. And they said, okay, study traumatic brain injury. There was so little research on people that had trauma to their brain because they didn't study it because they didn't think it was worth studying it because they didn't think the brain could change. And I said, that's such a hopeless view. So I started working with people with traumatic brain injuries, developing systems of understanding, well, that's the mind. What is the mind? How can we make the brain change? If we can understand what mind is, can we direct the mind to direct changes in the brain? And that's where I did some of the first neuroplasticity research back in the late 80s and early 90s in my field, and showed that with directed mind input, you can direct the neuroplasticity of your brain. So basically, your brain is making microscopic, you can control it. Your brain is making microscopic changes, genetically driven, genetically controlled, but driven by an engine, and the engine is your mind. So the difference between you and I and a dead person is our mind. So our mind is this massive concept that has been very misunderstood. It's become more of the discussion in philosophy than it has in hardcore medicine and science, which is unfortunate because there's also a whole body of research, obviously, on the mind-brain connection. But essentially, the trying to understand the mind is what really drove me. And when I saw patients that were written off as vegetables by doctors and going back to get degrees, by just teaching them how to
Wow.
use their mind, and not just
It's
one,
crazy.
but hundreds, and then eventually thousands, and now we reach millions through our platform.
It's
It was
amazing.
very quick. It wasn't a difficult decision for me to continue my research, develop a theory, develop a system for
Hmm.
how to understand the mind, how to make it work, and how to make the brain change. And in that mind-brain system, I started understanding thoughts and what thoughts are and memories and all that stuff. So that's been sort of the field of research.
That's amazing. It's almost like there's a parallel process because you were told that you couldn't do this, that the brain doesn't grow, and then your brain grew, and then you grew, if you will, and all of a sudden the process
Yeah.
of you creating this, being one of the first people to talk about neuroplasticity, but you did that yourself as well. So it's kind of interesting the parallel process, how that worked together. I remember
It is.
when I was in undergrad, we read about this person. I don't remember his name, but somehow he had like a crowbar that went up through his head,
Yes, very
and
famous.
yeah, and half of his brain didn't work, but then he was able to. His personality was off, but he was still able to have his motor functions, etc. And would that be? I mean, that's a really really traumatic version of it,
Yes,
but that's essentially, wouldn't you say, a form of that
yeah,
neuroplasticity?
traumatic brain injury. That's a very famous. It's a very famous it's a study, and it was used initially to. Most of the research on brain was done on people that were dead or had brain damage. So a lot of our understanding of the brain initially was from that angle. But what was
Mm-hmm.
interesting there is that this person was still able to function despite an absolutely massive amount of brain damage,
Sure.
and that was one of the first things that you sort of learned about in our neuroscience lectures, and it started showing you
Mm-hmm.
that we as humans we have. I mean, there's stories of people that are born with like hardly any brain and they're functioning normally, and then I've seen in my own career people, because I've worked with traumatic brain injuries, chronic traumatic
Sure.
encephalopathy, which is people with trauma,
Mm-hmm.
sports injuries,
Yeah.
autism, Alzheimer's, severe learning disabilities, severe cognitive impairments,
Impairments.
severe trauma like war trauma, sexual trauma. So it's been so I wanted to be able to help a person in the most constrained state that were manifesting with tremendous emotional challenges, cognitive, social, emotional challenges,
Mm-hmm.
and find ways of saying, okay, well, those are the realities of what your life is like at the moment.
Yeah.
But let's try and track back and find how we can change that in terms of building the
Exactly.
brain, in terms of finding the origin and deconstructing and
Mm-hmm.
reconstructing. And as a psychotherapist, that you can't resolve something unless you actually find the source of
The
that
source, of
issue.
course. Yeah.
So, and that's where I decided to really get into the mind-brain connection, because when you understand
Mm-hmm.
that psychoneurobiology, psycho being mind,
Mm-hmm.
neuro being brain, biology being body, when you
Body.
understand that root, then it helps you to then be more guided in how you process information. So I don't know if you want me to explain that sort of the
Well, I was going to
mind-brain
ask you,
connection
does
with.
that lead? Yeah, does that lead into the mind management aspect of it, where it goes? We talk about your conscious,
Definitely.
subconscious, and yeah, the non-conscious mind. I think
Absolutely.
I can see that. Yeah,
Absolutely.
tell me more about
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. So essentially, what we can look at is I'll go with some very basic analogies. I've got some models and things here. So here's a
Mm-hmm.
model of the brain and the body, and those, if you have listeners, I'm just holding up a model,
Mm-hmm.
and because have you got listeners and viewers?
Yes, you
Have you
have
got?
both. Yes.
Okay, so
Uh-huh.
listen. If you're just listening right now, you can just look at your own brain and body. Obviously, your brain's in your skull, but that's the
Mm-hmm.
physical part of you, and that we can understand. But now, if you're dead, this just pretty much does nothing anymore. So, but when someone's alive, this brain and body is doing what we're doing. We're communicating, and we can put all kinds of technology on, and we can see brain waves, and we can see
Mm-hmm.
EKG heart activity, and there's stuff going on. We're responding, we're interacting, and that ability to interact and be and experience life, that's mind. So mind is our aliveness, our ability
Mm-hmm.
to be human and experience the experiences of life. So
Mm.
here's our physical, and our mind would be almost like, if you wanted a visual, literally like a cloud around and going through your brain and your body. On a
Okay.
psychological level, your mind is how you think, feel, and choose. Now, those three things go
Mm-hmm.
together. When you
Mm.
think, you feel. When you think and feel, you choose. You can't think without feeling. You can't feel without thinking. You can't choose without thinking and feeling. So we've got to think of those three working together. And what we do as humans on an unconscious level, and I'm going to talk about what unconscious is in a moment, but
Okay.
we are on an unconscious level, we are circulating through this think, feel, choose to process the experiences of life at 400 billion
Interesting.
actions
Mm-hmm.
plus per second.
Wow. Amazing.
So what I've
Amazing.
done is look at that and then translate that back into a conscious process. So mind is all this think, feel, choose, and psychologically, and then also on a physics level, we see from the work in gravitational fields, Einstein's work on
Mm-hmm.
photons, the
Mm-hmm.
electromagnetic effect, all that shows us that every human, when they're alive, there's a very unique electromagnetic field around your body. And that's just an absolute established scientific fact. It's not anything woo-woo or weird. It's absolute fact.
Exactly.
There's also recent research on gravitational fields, which we know keep us from floating, but we've also got unique gravitational fields around our body. When someone dies, all of that goes. So there's so that can be considered kind of the physical aspect of the psychological aspect of mind. So think, feel, choose is this mind, is how we are listening now to each other, processing this information, how we experience life. But as we're doing the psychological stuff, there's a parallel physical process that's happening, and that's gravitational fields, electromagnetic forces, and that's what we pick up. Like I use QEEG technology in my neuroscience research, and that is picking up the brain waves in the brain. So the brain is responding energetically. If someone's dead, there are no brain waves. So when someone's alive and they are functioning like we are, there's going to be brainwave activity. There's going to be oxygen and blood flow. There's going to be electromagnetic activity through the blood. And that's what you pick. That's what the mind is generating. So mind is this energy force, and brain and body are the physical, and there's a magical relationship as mind interacts with brain and body. So it's kind of like this. Here is you in life, and life is, there's the environment of life. And as you open your eyes in the morning, you are in the environment of life. So you are reading that email, you're having that conversation, you're doing your work, you're reading the politics, you're having a meal, you're going to work, life. So every single experience, and the average person's having about 8,000 to 10,000 experiences a day. Every experience is kind of like the mind is the front line. The mind grabs it. So what comes first? The experience. The mind processes the experience into the brain, and then as soon as the mind hits the brain, there's a literal transformation that happens. The brain responds electromagnetically, neurochemically, genetically, and the experience is converted into little protein structures that are holding the data of the information and the emotions and everything about the experience in little vibrations, in little proteins, and then lots of proteins group together, and you grow little thought trees. So your mind builds the experience into a thought tree in the brain. So like now, the experience now, as we're talking about mental health, mind-brain connection, that's the experience, that's the name of the tree. So as your listeners are listening and your viewers are watching and listening, this experience has been converted through think, feel, choose, all that electromagnetics into the brain, and you are building a thought tree made of memories. So you build a thought. Thought is product of mind. So the experience is converted by mind into brain as a thought tree. And that thought tree is made of proteins. And as you can see, this tree's got lots of branches. So that's all the information. I'm giving you lots of information. So each bit of information is getting its own little branch and its own little group of branches. So the more I say, the more branches you grow. Now, what I am saying is actually in the root system of the tree. So we know that all trees, this tree's in a pot. So the source is always the root system. And then the branches are built immediately. You hear my words, you grow the little roots, and then that's your interpretation. So it's how you think, feel, and choose uniquely about what you're hearing, because we're all different, and we've all got all kinds of thoughts being activated to help you understand and process what I'm saying. Now, every experience is like that. The experience is there. You use existing thoughts. It's converted. The source, the actual source, the experience, the argument, the discussion, the email, the work meeting, the political thing you've discussed is all going in the source, and then you interpret, and then that combination then produces what you say and what you do. So what we can do as humans is we can look at what are we saying, what are we doing, what are the patterns, what are our emotions, our behaviors, our body responses, our perspective, those categories. We can look at those patterns, and we can become thought detectives to find out why we're doing them, because that's a healthy thought. So this is an unhealthy thought. So here's now a toxic thought. They look different in the brain. The proteins fold differently. The chemical balance is different. There's inflammation. The immune system is responding to this to get rid of this, because this protein structure is actually threatening survival. So the immune system will send out all the response it would if it was COVID virus, for example, to try and fight this. So if we suppress these things, then we've got major issues. Now, you as a psychotherapist would have worked with people that had suppressed a lot. So when we go, so the source over here, now I can quickly explain mind and brain and kind of wrap this up, and we can dive into the next question. But the source of any kind of a toxic experience is in the roots. Like I said over here, the source. So this would be the origin story, the source. So this could be maybe the abuse, the bullying, the trauma, whatever it was over time. Maybe it was repeated, whatever. As you experience it, you interpret. experience, interpret, experience, and you build this, you wire this experience into your brain over time. So someone's repeatedly abused with all the data, the experience, the abuse, the actual abuse is there. That interpretation, your thinking, feeling, and choosing, how you see yourself, how you see this experience, the emotions is over there. And that combination then influences how you show up. This is threatening survival. This is in the non-conscious mind. And it's threatening survival. So now hang on to that thought, and let's quickly talk about the layers of mind. Our conscious mind's the most easiest to understand. It's conscious when you're awake. It's what's operating now. But in addition to that, we have the non-conscious, N-O-N, not unconscious. Unconscious is when you're knocked out by a baseball bat or something, or you have an anesthetic. So unconscious is very often used in the incorrect way. Unconscious mind is not this thing that's driving us. The unconscious mind is when you're knocked out. The non-conscious is this huge, dynamic, brilliant, infinite, incredibly fast, massive part of your humanity, which is the driving force. It's where every experience that you've ever had, from in the womb to the age, of a certain point in the womb to the age that you're at now, is converted into these thought trees in the brain and in the mind. So every experience, as I've explained, is converted into the brain, but it's also converted into the mind. So you store every experience in the brain. So you've got all these thought trees in the brain, and you have in the waves surrounding the body, the mind, you have gravitational and electromagnetic waves, so also storing that information. So we are surrounded by our memories that also pass through our brain and our body and are in our cells, and that's why we have somatic memory. That's why when people have post-traumatic stress, they are recalling. What happens is the trigger happens. The trigger activates the brain, which then activates the body, which then activates the mind, or it happens the other way around. The mind is activated first by the trigger, that then activates the brain and then the body. And it's very fast. So sometimes it's the body responds first, brain, but it's very, very quick. And that's why you re-experience all the emotions and the feelings and the body sensations, even if it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, because every experience is stored in the brain physically, in the non-conscious mind, and in the body. So the non-conscious mind is working with the brain and the body to try and keep balance all the time. Anything that threatens survival is going to be your immune system is going to try and fight it physically. Your natural pharmacopoeia is going to try and get rid of it. And then your non-conscious mind, which is this massive infinite part of you, is going to be looking to try and restore the balance, because if you think of a wave, what we would consider a happy wave or a balanced wave would be a nice flow. But this kind of wave is an erratic wave. This produces this kind of wave. So this in your mind is this. So this is what it looks like in your brain. This is what it looks like in your mind. And in your genes, it's going to look like a mutation that's going to affect things like telomeres on your genes. Yeah. So there's this all over effect. That's why it's in your body. That's why things like trauma yoga and the somatic work, there's all the EMDR, and EMDR is pulling from your cells into your brain and into your mind. So all these, that's what I'm explaining over here. So your non-conscious mind is your driving force. It's massive. It operates 24/7. So at the moment, the non-conscious mind is working with your conscious mind. And how do we know that? As I'm speaking, all kinds of thoughts are popping up in relation to what I'm saying. Maybe when I said the word abuse, an abuse popped up, or whatever So where is it popping up from? The non-conscious mind. So whatever you are becoming aware of are existing thoughts made of memories, because these little branches are the branch memories and the root memories. So thought is made of memories. Memories are inside thoughts. And every time that as I'm speaking, every time these move, they're moving from the non-conscious to the conscious mind. They are triggered by what you're hearing. So we're using existing thoughts with their memories to understand this information. So these are popping up, and potentially some toxic things are popping up. As I mentioned, words like trauma or bullying or sexual trauma or war trauma, or any words could have caused this to pop up. Now, the reason they move, when I say pop up, the trigger from the environment, what you're hearing or what you're experiencing, is processed through your mind into your brain, and it activates whatever that is linked to. And that is then pushed up by the non-conscious mind through the subconscious. So the subconscious is the bridge. between the non-conscious and the conscious mind. And the reason it's pushed up is because the conscious mind has to work with the non-conscious mind to fix this. And that's why the non-conscious mind is always looking to restore balance. And this is going to cause an imbalance in energy, which threatens your survival, which increases your vulnerability to disease by 35 to 98%. So any suppressed and undealt with issue, any toxic patterns that we've developed creates these physical patterns in the brain, body, and mind. And that upsets our entire balance. So our non-conscious mind's job is to search for these, as well as sending up these to help us to process our current experiences. But it's also trying to always clean up. And so when we get these prompts from the non-conscious mind, it's just trying to say, hey, pay attention.
Sure.
There's a message I'm sending you. There's a reason that you're feeling patterns of depression, where you're feeling anxiety, why you're feeling frustration, why you're feeling like these mood swings. It's not that you have a brain disease. You don't have a neuropsychiatric brain disease. If you have depression, depression's not a neuropsychiatric brain disease, nor is anxiety, nor is general anxiety disorder. None of these are, it's like diabetes or cancer, which is how they've been sold to people. What they are they warning signals, symptoms of an underlying cause. So it's your non-conscious mind sending up a signal of depression saying, hey, this is actually me telling you need to pay attention. You are depressed because of. You're not depressed. You're not depression. You are depressed because of. It's a doing versus a being. So when you pay attention to the signal, this toxic thing is generating a signal. The unconscious mind is shooting the signal. The depression is a signal. And if you look at it as, I'm depressed, it's awful, but it's telling me something. And you turn into a thought detective, you change all your neurophysiology and you start unpacking and deconstructing to find the why. Once you found the why, you have to reconstruct so that you can make it work for you and not against you. So that's a very quick Cliff Notes synopsis through.
No,
I don't know
that.
if that makes sense if you want to unpack
No, it makes sense to me. I was going to ask you, how does this deal with just probability in general? So we create the probability of this is probably what's going to happen. And so we act as if when something happens, so it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in the moment. So I activate this, I see it, but before it actually happens, I've already told myself it's going to happen in that moment. Do you talk more about that as well, the probability aspect of how that?
Yes, that's such an excellent question. So here is your self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is wired into your brain. So the experience was wired into your brain. Now, for something to become a behavior that influences your functioning. So to become almost like we talk about automatic responses, which is not really what it is. It's more intelligent than that. It's actually more of an automatized response where it's been wired into the brain and it's a pathway that's been triggered there, but you in a certain extent are controlled by it, but until you actually recognize then you control. So what happens is that if you repeatedly are having an abuse, your interpretation of the abuse is here. That's the probability. Oh, if that happens, I'm bad. So many people that have sexual trauma, as you would know, with your background, they look at themselves as shame and not worthy and deserving of bad treatment. There's a complete distortion and it's very insidious and infects all parts of their life. So until they recognize that thinking is coming from that and it needs to be deconstructed and reconstructed, that is a pattern. And if it's gone on for longer than 63 days, because that's part of the work I've done, is to look at how long does it take to actually form a habit. Because a habit is automatization. It's the correct word is automatization. And when something's automatized, it's a very intelligent, dynamic thought tree with very powerful memories attached that is governing your behavior or influencing your behavior. So it's wired in. And if you've done this, if you've had this thinking pattern for longer than 63 days, it is a well-established pathway. So it's going to take you have to bring it into awareness, and you're going to have to go through the process of 63-day cycles minimum, sometimes multiple 63-day cycles. But what my research has shown is that habits don't form in 21 days. That's a myth that was promulgated years ago. It's actually a minimum of around about 63 days, give or take, to around about 9 weeks. It takes about 9 weeks to pull this up, to find the origin, to deconstruct it, to build it into a healthy version. You can't change what's done to you, but you can change what's in you in terms of how you
Yes,
respond. That's
exactly. Yeah.
reconceptualization. But that process takes cycles of 63 days, and it
Wow.
takes specific amount of work every day. And that's what we're not telling people. People are going into talk therapy, they're going into psychotherapy, which is absolutely brilliant and so important, because that starts helping us to become these thought detectives, to understand I'm doing what I do because of, and finding that
Yeah,
source.
exactly.
But once you're aware, you also have to reconstruct. So there's awareness, and then there's beyond awareness. It's going beyond to the reconstruction process. And that has very definite time. So very often people can feel stuck. They can say, I know I'm like this because I was this, and this happened to me. And they can tell you, but they're still not, their life's still like just not progressing forward. That's what you're talking about there. There's this probability they're still living on this. This hasn't been changed. So this probability, all these probabilities of this is how I've responded for so long. I'm so used to this that until you actually acknowledge and say, hey, okay, I own that. I am doing that because of that. Now I need to change that. Until you've done that work, this is how you're going to keep on. This will keep drawing you back, and you'll feel stuck on that hamster wheel because you keep reinforcing. You can't pull this up, get awareness, and then just shove it back down again, get triggered, be aware, I know what's going on, but you don't change it, and you just keep this, you just make it stronger.
Yeah,
so what we
exactly.
have to do is go through the painful work of reconstructing.
We only have a few more minutes.
That's my management.
No, I love that. I actually love this. We only have a few more minutes, but I want you to tell them, I'll tell the name of the book in a second, but I also want to tell them about the app that you have. I think it's brilliant.
Thank you. It's called the Neurocycle, and the second half of the book I talk about the Neurocycle. Essentially, the Neurocycle is the system I developed based on my theory, the Geodesic Information Processing theory. So years ago, 38 years ago, as a scientist, I started doing the research, developed a theory, and then I've spent these last 38 years constantly researching in the field. So I'm saying that to say that the system that I've developed called the Neurocycle has come out of 38 years of intensive clinical practice and clinical research. And it's neurobiology. So I've looked at this mind-brain-body connection, and I've tried to find a delivery system that I can help my patients initially when I was practicing, and everyone who's alive, manage their mind. Because you can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you can't even go 3 seconds without managing your mind. So I'm all for therapy, counseling, coaching, but your mind is always with you. So I wanted to give people not only a tool for detoxing that trauma, and a great therapeutic tool, a lot of therapists use this in therapy, but also how can I manage myself? Are you living with yourself 24/7? You're not with your therapist 24/7. You wake up at night, you're with yourself. You've got to manage your mind. So the system I developed has got deep therapeutic application, but it also has day-to-day application. How do I manage when I look at a social media post and I feel imposter syndrome? You can use the Neurocycle in 5 seconds for that. You can use the Neurocycle daily over 63-day cycles for 15 to 45-minute blocks of time to detox the trauma, to break down toxic habits, to build new habits. So it's basically like Amazon. It's a delivery system. Amazon Amazon's a brilliant delivery system, but it delivers anything. That's what the Neurocycle is. It's a delivery system that when you use it, you are actually systematically taking your wise mind, which is that non-conscious inner core wisdom that we have, where all our thoughts and memories are. But the core of our non-conscious mind is this wise mind, which is our instinctive, introspective ability that we have to dig deep and to know the right thing. And that develops over time. That wisdom develops. Every human's got this. It's our wired for love nature. It's our optimism bias. And we all do it. Like someone asks you for advice, you give them advice. That's your wisdom. This discussion now, we're drawing on that wisdom. So everyone has it. We don't all use it as well as we should. So the easiest way to understand the Neurocycle is that we have this messy mind, which is how we experience life. It's at the front line of life, and it's okay to be messy. It's how we are hypothesizing. We're scientists. We don't know what the next person's going to say. We can't control events and circumstances. So we're out there kind of making a mess, but the difference is we don't want to stay in the mess. We are designed, our wired for love nature is designed to experiment, make the mess and say, oh, oops, I snapped. I was irritable. I'm getting depressed. I have a pattern of this. In other words, self-regulation, which is mind management. The ability to say, okay, I've made a mess. It's okay to make a mess. That's part of it. But but now wise mind needs to talk to messy mind. How do I fix this? So I see I've been irritable. Why am I irritable? Let me change that. I see the impact of being irritable on someone. Or I'm depressed. It's changed. Why? So that's mind management, and the Neurocycle is used for that. So it's a system within which you can put any technique, any therapeutic technique, anything that works for you, any green juice, any meditation, whatever you put in, but it's put in the right place. If you don't, if you just do meditation or you just do cognitive behavior therapy, and if you don't put them in the right order of the mind-brain order, it won't deliver correctly. It's like if Amazon doesn't have proper systems in place, things don't get delivered. This is what it does. It gives you the systems. It puts the systems in place so that you can deliver, get your mind, wise mind talking to your messy mind and directing the neuroplasticity and redesigning these things, rewiring your brain in the proper time sequence to make it work. So it's very effective. I show in my research that it's literally you can be empowered by 81% as you use the system. Just 10% will change your life. 81% without drugs, without medication, just using your amazing mind, you can start transforming.
I love this. Absolutely love this. I am definitely going to purchase this book. If my listeners want to find out more information about you and to purchase this book, one more time, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, and also use the app called the
Neurocycle.
Where'd it go? Neurocycle. Where will they find all this information online?
Well, the book is available wherever books are sold. If they go to my website, drleaf.com, they can also get it. If they buy it there, they get a free download workbook that goes with it. My social media handles are Dr. Caroline Leaf, and you can get everywhere from my Instagram handle. And the Neurocycle app's available on iTunes and Google Play.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. My listeners also know that if they can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmiller@lifeology.com, and I will link you with all of her information. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for all your wisdom.
Thank you.
I'm very, very humbled. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.